Today, we'll look at a series of very interesting cases. These are women sentenced to death for killing their children, but we'll also see women sentenced to spend their lives in prison for the same reason. In the United States, women sentenced to death represent a very low percentage compared to men. Even when facing the same crime, men are more likely to be executed. For this reason, today we'll delve into these shocking cases. Let's begin with number 1. Susan Smith, State, South Carolina. In 1994, 23-year-old Susan Smith lived in Union, South Carolina, with her 2 young sons, Michael, age 3, and Alex, 14 months. Susan appeared to lead a quiet life, but her marriage was in crisis, and she had started a relationship with a man who did not want children. On October 25, 1994, Susan drove her car to Lake John D. Long, left her children strapped in the back seats, and let the vehicle sink into the water, drowning them. At first, Susan shocked the country by claiming that a black man had carjacked her vehicle with the children inside. For 9 days, her story kept the nation on edge until inconsistencies in her account led to her confession. She admitted that she killed her children to get rid of them and maintain her new relationship. In 1995, Susan was tried for double murder. The prosecution sought the death penalty, but the defense argued that she suffered from depression and had a history of abuse. The jury sentenced her to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Since her incarceration, Susan has had disciplinary issues in prison but has expressed remorse. Her case remains one of the most shocking filicides in the U.S., marked by initial deception and the pain of a betrayed community. Andrea Yates, State, Texas. In 2001, 37-year-old Andrea Yates lived in Houston, Texas, with her husband and their 5 children: Noah, age 7, John, 5, Paul, 3, Luke, 2, and Mary, 6 months. Andrea suffered from severe postpartum depression and psychosis, worsened by multiple pregnancies and a strict religious upbringing. On June 20, 2001, after being left alone at home, she drowned her 5 children one by one in the bathtub. She then called the police and confessed to the crime.
What's your name? What's the problem? Needed to come. Is your husband there? No. What's the problem? I need him to come. I need to know why we're coming, ma'am. Is he there standing next to you? She? Are you having disturbance? Are you ill or what? Yes, I'm ill. You need an ambulance? No, I need a police officer.
The case sparked a national debate about mental health. Andrea had previously attempted suicide and was diagnosed with postpartum psychosis, but her treatment had been inadequate. In her first trial in 2002, she was sentenced to life in prison, but in 2006, a new trial found her not guilty by reason of insanity. She was committed to a state psychiatric hospital where she remains under treatment. Andrea Yates' case marked a turning point in the understanding of postpartum depression and mental illness, although her tragedy left a deep scar on society. Lamora Williams, State, Georgia. In 2017, 24-year-old Lamora Williams lived in Atlanta, Georgia, with her 4 young children. On October 12, 2017, in an incomprehensible act, Lamora placed 2 of her sons, Jacarter, age 1, and Keontae, age 2, into a lit oven, causing their deaths by burns. She initially video-called the children's father to show him the bodies, claiming she found them that way after leaving them with a babysitter.
911. Ma'am, I have a question, and this is a serious matter. I just left my cousin in the house with my kids. She just left my kids in the house when I came back from work, and my kids, 2 of my kids are dead. What do I gotta do? They dead. She left them dead in the house by themselves.
Oh, okay, ma'am. Where are you now?
I'm in my house. She left my door open. My baby boy, my oldest baby boy, is the only one that's here, the only one that's alive. She left them in the house by themselves. She left them in here, and they knocked the stove on. Can you listen? When I came in, the stove was laying on my son. I don't know what to do. I just came home to work from this, and she just left my baby dead.
Okay, ma'am. I'm gonna get EMS and I'm gonna get police and fire at the location. Can you tell me where you're located?
Ma'am, I can't even talk. This is so serious. I'm so scared.
Police later discovered that no babysitter had been involved. Lamora was arrested and charged with murder. During her 2024 trial, the defense argued she suffered from mental health problems, but the evidence, including her confession, was overwhelming. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 35 years. The case horrified the Atlanta community, raising questions about the failures in support systems for mothers in crisis. Trin T. Nguyen, State, Pennsylvania. In 2022, 40-year-old Trin T. Nguyen lived in Reading, Pennsylvania, with her two sons, Nelson, age 9, and Jeffrey, age 13. On May 2, 2022, Trin shot her children while they slept, killing them instantly. She then attempted to attack a neighbor before being detained. The investigation did not uncover a clear motive, although personal and emotional issues were speculated. In 2023, Trin pleaded guilty to 2 counts of first-degree murder. She was sentenced to 2 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. During the trial, she expressed remorse, but the community was devastated by the loss of the children. The case highlighted the urgent need for early intervention in mental health crises. Leilani Simon, State, Georgia. In 2022, 24-year-old Leilani Simon lived in Savannah, Georgia, with her 20-month-old son, Quentin. On October 5, 2022, Leilani reported Quentin missing, triggering a massive search. Weeks later, the child's remains were found in a landfill. The investigation revealed that Leilani had killed him and disposed of his body to cover up the crime. In 2024, Leilani was tried and sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole. Prosecutors argued that she acted out of personal motives, possibly related to family conflicts. The case shocked Savannah, and the community held vigils in Quentin's memory, demanding justice for the little boy. Samantha Moreno Rodriguez, State, Nevada. In 2021, 35-year-old Samantha Moreno Rodriguez lived in San Jose, California, with her 7-year-old son, Liam. In May 2021, Samantha strangled Liam and abandoned his body in a desert area near Las Vegas, Nevada. The body was found by hikers, triggering a nationwide search for the mother. Samantha was arrested weeks later in Colorado. During her 2022 trial, she pleaded guilty to first-degree murder to avoid the death penalty. She was sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 28 years. No clear motive was revealed, though personal and financial struggles were speculated. The case left a lasting impact on the Las Vegas community. Michelle Kehoe, State, in Iowa. In 2008, 35-year-old Michelle Kehoe lived in Iowa with her 2 sons, Seth, age 2, and Sean, age 7. On October 26, 2008, Michelle took her children to a wooded area where she slit Seth's throat, killing him, and attempted to do the same to Sean, who miraculously survived. She then attempted to take her own life by cutting her own throat. At trial, the defense argued that Michelle suffered from severe depression and a mental disorder. However, she was found guilty of first-degree murder and attempted murder, receiving a life sentence without the possibility of parole. The case sparked discussions about maternal mental health, but the brutality of the crime left a deep mark on the Iowa community. Lori Vallow Daybell, State, Idaho. In 2019, 46-year-old Lori Vallow Daybell lived in Rexburg, Idaho, with her children JJ Vallow, age 7, and Tylee Ryan, age 16. Influenced by extreme apocalyptic beliefs and her husband Chad Daybell, Lori killed her children as part of a religious ritual. Their bodies were found buried on Chad's property in 2020, after months of searching. In 2023, Lori was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for the murders of her children and Chad's ex-wife. The trial revealed disturbing details about their belief that the children were zombies, possessed by evil spirits. The case, known as the Idaho cult murders, captured national attention due to its mix of fanaticism and tragedy. Amber Pastor, State, Indiana. In 2016, 29-year-old Amber Pastor lived in Fort Wayne, Indiana, with her children Renee, 6, and Liliana, 7. On September 26, 2016, Amber abducted the children during a custody dispute with her ex-husband and suffocated them in the back seat of her car. Afterwards, she turned herself in and confessed to the crime. In 2017, Amber was sentenced to life in prison without parole after pleading guilty to 2 counts of murder. Her defense team brought up mental health issues, but it wasn't enough to change the outcome. The case shocked the Indiana community and raised serious questions about failures in the family protection system. Now, let's take a closer look at the women who were sentenced to death in the United States for killing their own children. If you'd like me to include cases from the UK or other countries in a future video, let me know in the comments. Let's begin. Number 1. Christina Marie Riggs. State, Arkansas. In 1997, 26-year-old Christina Marie Riggs was living in Sherwood, Arkansas, with her 2 young children, Justin, 5, and Shelby, 2. A single mother and nurse, Christina was battling severe depression after a failed marriage and crushing financial troubles. On the night of November 4, 1997, in a desperate act, she decided to end her children's lives. She injected them with a lethal dose of potassium chloride, a drug she had access to through her job, while they slept. When Justin didn't die right away, she smothered him with a pillow. Afterwards, she attempted suicide by overdosing on antidepressants, but survived. Police found the children's bodies after responding to an emergency call. Christina immediately confessed, saying she believed her children had no future without her and she didn't want them to be separated after her death. Her explanation struck a chord, but wasn't enough to spare her from the ultimate sentence. In 1998, she was tried for double murder. Surprisingly, Christina refused to fight the death penalty, claiming she deserved it. The jury found her guilty and sentenced her to death. While in prison, Christina showed deep remorse, writing letters to her loved ones and asking for forgiveness. In May 2000, at the age of 28, she was executed by lethal injection at the Arkansas State Prison. She was the first woman executed in the state since 1845. Christina didn't request a special last meal. Her final words were heartbreaking. "There is no way to express how sorry I am for what I've done. I hope my death gives you peace. I love you all." Her case sparked debate about mental illness and the death penalty, but her refusal to appeal sealed her fate. Number 2. Louise Pete. State, California. In 1944, 64-year-old Louise Pete was living in Los Angeles, California, with a criminal record that included a 1920 murder conviction. Though known for multiple crimes, Louise was sentenced to death for the 1944 murder of her adopted daughter, 20-year-old Margaret Logan. She shot her in their home, driven by financial and personal motives. She was arrested after the body was discovered and stood trial in 1945 for first-degree murder. Prosecutors emphasized her violent history, and the defense failed to sway the jury. Louise was sentenced to death and executed in the gas chamber at San Quentin Prison on April 11, 1947. There are no records of her final words or her last meal. Though often remembered as a serial killer, the murder of her adopted daughter remains one of the lesser-known parts of her criminal legacy. Number 3. Judy Buenoano. State, Florida. In 1971, Judy Buenoano, a 28-year-old woman, was married to James Goodyear. The couple's life seemed relatively calm in the city of Winter Park, Florida. However, behind this facade of normality, Judy harbored a deadly plan. One day, while James was sick, Judy began secretly administering him a lethal dose of arsenic. After several days, James died of what appeared to be a natural illness. However, the circumstances surrounding his death were not as simple. Judy, who had faced financial difficulties, saw an opportunity in her husband's life insurance policy. After his death, she collected a significant sum of money, which raised suspicions with the authorities. Initial investigations yielded no conclusive evidence, but years later, Judy's dark pattern began to surface. What seemed to be a death from natural causes was only the first step in a series of murders that Judy would commit. In 1980, her son Michael also died under the same circumstances. This time, she had been giving him arsenic in his food for some time until he finally died. Then, in 1983, she attempted to murder her boyfriend, John Gentry, this time by putting arsenic in the drinks she offered him. Despite the harm caused, John survived, and he became an important witness and victim in the trial. The police were eventually able to link the deaths of James and Michael, and Judy was arrested. In 1984, she was convicted of her husband's murder and, due to the severity of her crimes, was sentenced to death. Judy Buenoano's execution took place on March 30, 1998, when she was 54 years old, at Florida State Prison. The method used to carry out her execution was the electric chair. In her final words, Judy appeared calm and serene. She bid farewell by saying, "I am at peace with God." There were no reports of her asking for forgiveness or expressing remorse for her crimes. The story of Judy Buenoano is a chilling tale of manipulation, murder, and greed, leaving an indelible mark in the history of women condemned to death in the United States. To be continued. Number 4. Frances Newton, State, Texas. In 1987, Frances Newton, 21, lived in Houston, Texas, with her husband Adrian, 23, and their 2 children, Alton, 7, and Farah, 21 months. Although the family appeared to live a normal life, tensions were evident. Adrian had addiction problems, and the couple's relationship was deteriorating. On April 7, 1987, Frances called the police to report that her entire family was dead in their home. Adrian had been shot in the head while sitting on the couch, and the children were found in their beds, each with a gunshot wound to the chest. There were no signs of forced entry or struggle. The investigation revealed that, less than a month before the murders, Frances had taken out life insurance policies worth $50,000 for her husband and daughter, naming herself as the beneficiary. There was already a policy for her son, Alton. Additionally, it was discovered that Frances had hidden a .25 caliber handgun in an abandoned house owned by her family. Ballistics tests confirmed that this weapon was used in the murders. Frances was arrested 2 weeks later, on April 22, 1987, and charged with capital murder. During the trial, the prosecution argued that the motive was financial, based on the life insurance policies. The defense claimed that Frances was innocent and that a drug dealer to whom her husband owed money could have been responsible. However, the jury found her guilty. Just a year and a half later, on November 17, 1988, Frances was sentenced to death. Over the next 17 years, she maintained her innocence and filed multiple appeals, claiming errors in the process and questioning the evidence presented. Despite her efforts, all appeals were rejected. On September 14, 2005, Frances Newton was executed by lethal injection at the Huntsville prison in Texas. She was 40 years old. She was the first African-American woman executed in Texas since 1858. Her last meal consisted of fried chicken, French fries, a salad with ranch dressing, and a Coca-Cola. She declined to give any final words. To be continued. Number 5. Darlie Routier, State, Texas. In 1996, 26-year-old Darlie Routier lived in Rolette, Texas, with her husband Darren and their 3 sons, Devin, 6, Damon, 5, and baby Drake. On the night of June 6, 1996, Darlie called 911, claiming an intruder had broken in and stabbed her 2 oldest children and attacked her too. Devin and Damon died from multiple stab wounds, while Darlie had only superficial injuries. Police grew suspicious of her story due to inconsistencies, a lack of evidence pointing to a break-in, and a video showing Darlie seemingly celebrating just days after the murders. Prosecutors argued that she killed her children due to financial stress. In 1997, she was tried for Damon's murder, although she was suspected in Devin's death as well, and was sentenced to death by lethal injection. As of 2025, Darlie Routier, now 55, remains on death row at the Patrick L. O'Daniel Unit in Gatesville, Texas. Her case remains controversial, with advocates arguing that forensic errors and an unfair trial led to her conviction. No execution date has been set. Number 6. Dora Luz Buenrostro, State, California. In 1994, 34-year-old Dora Luz Buenrostro lived in San Jacinto, California, with her 3 children, Susana, 9, Vicente, 8, and Deidre, 4. On October 27, 1994, Dora stabbed all 3 children to death in their home. At first, she blamed her ex-husband Alejandro, claiming he had murdered the children during a custody dispute. But forensic evidence, including blood on her clothes and contradictions in her story, pointed to her as the killer. Investigators believed Dora acted out of revenge after Alejandro started a new relationship. In 1998, she was convicted of triple murder and sentenced to death. Prosecutors highlighted the brutality and premeditation of the killings, while the defense pointed to Dora's history of domestic abuse, an argument that failed to sway the jury. As of 2025, Dora Buenrostro, now 65, remains on death row at the Central California Women's Facility. California has a moratorium on executions since 2019, so no execution date is set. Her case remains relatively unknown, likely due to limited media coverage and the state's focus on more high-profile cases. Betty Lou Beets, State, Texas. In 1983, Betty Lou Beets, a mother of 5 children, was living in Gun Barrel City, Texas. One night, while her 5th husband, Jimmy Don Beets, was asleep, she took a .38 caliber revolver, Jimmy's property, and shot him in the head. Then, with the help of her teenage son Robbie, she buried the body in a gardening pot in her backyard, covering it with a decorative fountain to hide it. What initially seemed like a case of domestic violence took a darker turn when authorities discovered that Betty had also murdered her 4th husband, Doyle Wayne Barker, years earlier in 1981. What was believed to be a disappearance was finally revealed when the police dug to search for Jimmy's body and instead found the remains of her previous husband, number 4. He had been buried in the garden, inside a shed. But the most disturbing part didn't end there. Over time, authorities discovered that her previous marriages also had chilling situations. Her first marriage ended after multiple episodes of violence. Her second husband, Bill Lane, accused her of trying to poison him. And her third husband, Ronnie Threlcold, was shot in the back, but survived. Surprisingly, they remarried after that episode. The pattern was clear. Betty's marriages ended with abuse, gunshots, or death, all seemingly driven by a financial motive: life insurance policies. After a trial that revealed her criminal history and sinister motives, Betty Lou Beets was sentenced to death 2 years later in 1985. She was executed on February 24, 2000, at the Huntsville prison in Texas at the age of 62 by lethal injection. Her last meal consisted of a fried chicken sandwich, French fries, and iced tea. Her final words were, "God bless you all. I am at peace." With her death, one of the most infamous cases of a female death row inmate in the United States came to a close. Kelly Renee Gissendaner, State, Georgia. In 1997, 28-year-old Kelly was living a seemingly peaceful life with her husband, Douglas Gissendaner, in the suburb of Auburn, Georgia. However, what no one knew was that behind that family facade, she was planning a tragedy. Kelly no longer wanted to stay with her husband. Desperate to escape and start a new life with her lover, Gregory Owen, she orchestrated Douglas's murder. On February 7, 1997, Owen, following the plan, kidnapped Douglas as he was leaving work. He forced him to drive to a wooded area where he beat him with a club and repeatedly stabbed him. Then, to destroy evidence, they set the victim's car on fire and disposed of the weapon. A few days later, Owen was arrested thanks to phone calls and key testimonies. Under pressure, he confessed everything in exchange for avoiding the death penalty. He claimed that Kelly had planned the crime with the intention of collecting the life insurance and starting a new life with him. Kelly was arrested and later convicted of first-degree murder. The trial was shocking. The defense tried to argue that Kelly had been manipulated by Owen, but the evidence was overwhelming. She had planned and orchestrated the crime. After years of appeals, Kelly was finally executed on September 30, 2015, becoming the first woman executed in Georgia since 1945. The execution was carried out by lethal injection at the Georgia State Prison at the age of 47. One of the few people present in the execution chamber was her attorney, Susan. In her last words, Kelly expressed remorse for the pain she had caused, apologized to Douglas's family, and spoke of her faith. She bid farewell by saying, "I thank everyone who has been with me. I bless you all. I love you, Susan. Tell my kids I left singing Amazing Grace. In her final moments, Kelly sang Amazing Grace, an act of faith and repentance before she died. Frances Newton, State, Texas. In 1987, Frances Newton, 21, lived in Houston, Texas, with her husband Adrian, 23, and their 2 children, Alton, 7, and Farah, 21 months. Although the family appeared to live a normal life, tensions were evident. Adrian had addiction problems, and the couple's relationship was deteriorating. On April 7, 1987, Frances called the police to report that her entire family was dead in their home. Adrian had been shot in the head while sitting on the couch, and the children were found in their beds, each with a gunshot wound to the chest. There were no signs of forced entry or struggle. The investigation revealed that, less than a month before the murders, Frances had taken out life insurance policies worth $50,000 for her husband and daughter, naming herself as the beneficiary. There was already a policy for her son, Alton. Additionally, it was discovered that Frances had hidden a .25 caliber handgun in an abandoned house owned by her family. Ballistics tests confirmed that this weapon was used in the murders. Frances was arrested 2 weeks later, on April 22, 1987, and charged with capital murder. During the trial, the prosecution argued that the motive was financial, based on the life insurance policies. The defense claimed that Frances was innocent and that a drug dealer to whom her husband owed money could have been responsible. However, the jury found her guilty. Just a year and a half later, on November 17, 1988, Frances was sentenced to death. Over the next 17 years, she maintained her innocence and filed multiple appeals, claiming errors in the process and questioning the evidence presented. Despite her efforts, all appeals were rejected. On September 14, 2005, Frances Newton was executed by lethal injection at the Huntsville prison in Texas. She was 40 years old. She was the first African-American woman executed in Texas since 1858. Her last meal consisted of fried chicken, French fries, a salad with ranch dressing, and a Coca-Cola. She declined to give any final words. Teresa Lewis, State, Virginia. In 2002, Teresa Lewis, 33, lived in Pittsylvania County, Virginia, with her husband Julian Lewis, 51, and her stepson, Charles, 25. While the family appeared to lead a peaceful life, Teresa had a hidden plan. She first began a relationship with Matthew Schallenberger, 21, and together with him and his friend Rodney Fuller, 19, devised a plan to murder Julian and Charles in order to collect the life insurance policies, which amounted to approximately $250,000. On October 30, 2002, while Julian was asleep, Teresa left the back door of the house open to allow the assassins to enter. Schallenberger and Fuller entered and shot Julian and Charles while they slept. Teresa waited 45 minutes before calling 911, claiming that intruders had broken into the house. The investigation revealed inconsistencies in her story, and Teresa eventually confessed to conspiring in the murders. She was arrested and charged with capital murder. During the trial, the prosecution argued that Teresa was the mastermind behind the crime, motivated by the insurance money. The defense presented evidence that Teresa had an IQ of 72 and suffered from personality disorders, suggesting that she had been manipulated by Schallenberger. Despite appeals and requests for clemency based on her limited mental capacity, Teresa was sentenced to death. Her accomplices, Schallenberger and Fuller, received life sentences without the possibility of parole. On September 23, 2010, Teresa Lewis was executed by lethal injection at the Greensville Prison, Virginia. She was 41 years old. Her last meal consisted of 2 fried chicken breasts, buttered sweet peas, a slice of German chocolate cake or apple pie, and a Dr. Pepper soda. Before her execution, Teresa expressed her remorse and love for her family. Her final words were, "I want Kathy, her stepdaughter, to know that I love her and that I am very sorry." Judy Buenoano, State, Florida. In 1971, Judy Buenoano, a 28-year-old woman, was married to James Goodyear. The couple's life seemed relatively calm in the city of Winter Park, Florida. However, behind this facade of normality, Judy harbored a deadly plan. One day, while James was sick, Judy began secretly administering him a lethal dose of arsenic. After several days, James died of what appeared to be a natural illness. However, the circumstances surrounding his death were not as simple. Judy, who had faced financial difficulties, saw an opportunity in her husband's life insurance policy. After his death, she collected a significant sum of money, which raised suspicions with the authorities. Initial investigations yielded no conclusive evidence, but years later, Judy's dark pattern began to surface. What seemed to be a death from natural causes was only the first step in a series of murders that Judy would commit. In 1980, her son Michael also died under the same circumstances. This time, she had been giving him arsenic in his food for some time until he finally died. Then, in 1983, she attempted to murder her boyfriend, John Gentry, this time by putting arsenic in the drinks she offered him. Despite the harm caused, John survived, and he became an important witness and victim in the trial. The police were eventually able to link the deaths of James and Michael, and Judy was arrested. In 1984, she was convicted of her husband's murder and, due to the severity of her crimes, was sentenced to death. Judy Buenoano's execution took place on March 30, 1998, when she was 54 years old, at Florida State Prison. The method used to carry out her execution was the electric chair. In her final words, Judy appeared calm and serene. She bid farewell by saying, "I am at peace with God." There were no reports of her asking for forgiveness or expressing remorse for her crimes. The story of Judy Buenoano is a chilling tale of manipulation, murder, and greed, leaving an indelible mark in the history of women condemned to death in the United States. Now, don't go anywhere, because we're about to look at 5 police officers who were sentenced to death for committing heinous crimes. Yes, you heard that right, police officers. But first, make sure to subscribe to the channel. It's really important so we can monetize and keep improving the quality of our content, which stands out from the rest thanks to the effort we put into every single video. On March 4, 1995, New Orleans witnessed a crime that sent chills through an entire community. At Kim An, a small Vietnamese restaurant, 3 people were brutally murdered. Williams, a 25-year-old police officer, was working as a security guard. Ha Vu, 24, and her younger brother Quang, 17, were helping close up for the night. No one could have imagined that death would come wearing a badge. Antoinette Frank, a 23-year-old police officer, and her boyfriend, 18-year-old Rogers Lacaze, entered the restaurant around midnight. They had been there earlier that day, already raising suspicions. Chow Vu, sister of Ha and Quang, sensed trouble and hid money in the microwave. Frank and Lacaze used a stolen key to get inside. Within seconds, everything turned into chaos. They pushed Williams and the Vu siblings into the kitchen. Lacaze shot Williams, 1 bullet to the neck, another to the head, and a third to the back. The officer dropped dead. Frank forced Ha to kneel and shot her 3 times. Then she pistol-whipped Quang before finishing him off with 6 bullets. Chow and her brother Kwok, hiding inside a refrigerator, heard the gunshots, the screams, then silence. Through a small crack, Chow saw Frank checking the bodies, searching for money. They stole a few $100s and fled. A while later, Frank came back, this time in her police uniform. She pretended to be responding to an emergency call, but it's believed she returned to make sure there were no witnesses. But Chow, still hiding, recognized her. She knew that the officer was the killer. Hours later, police arrived at the restaurant after a 911 call from Kwok. Chow, trembling but determined, waited for the right moment. Then she stepped forward and pointed to Frank. It was her. She killed them, her finger aimed straight at Frank. A deafening silence fell over the officers, stunned. They didn't arrest her on the spot. After all, she was one of their own. But the accusation was enough to bring her in for questioning later that day. Detective Eddie Rance, a veteran of the department, took over the investigation. His team started at the restaurant. They interviewed Chow, who recounted every detail: how Frank and Lacaze entered, how they executed her family, how she watched it all unfold from the refrigerator. Her testimony was clear, unwavering, and pointed directly at Frank. Rance dug into Kim An's records and found that Frank had worked there as a security guard months earlier. She knew exactly how to get in and where the money was kept. Officers found a broken lock on the back door, suggesting a stolen key was used. One employee confirmed a key had gone missing weeks before, while Frank was still working there. Then, investigators tracked Lacaze's movements. A gas station receipt showed a credit card transaction made just 45 minutes after the murders, using Ronald Williams' card. Security footage confirmed it was Lacaze making the purchase. It was a damning lead. A strange rumor surfaced during a search of Frank's home. A human skull with a bullet hole was found buried under the floor. Some suspected it might belong to her father, who had disappeared years earlier, but this was never confirmed nor linked to the case. Investigators focused on the hard evidence, and the worst was yet to come. With Chow's testimony, the stolen key, and the credit card transaction, Detective Rance had enough. Within 24 hours, the police had gathered the evidence needed to act. Frank and Lacaze were arrested. New Orleans was in shock. How could a police officer commit such a brutal act? Antoinette Frank was far from a model cop. Born in 1971, she grew up in a troubled home. In 1993, she joined the New Orleans Police Department, but she was unfit for the job. She lied on her application. She failed 2 psychiatric evaluations. One doctor called her superficial and warned she should never be hired. Still, the department, desperate for officers, let her in. Her fellow officers found her erratic. Then she met Rogers Lacaze, a known criminal who became her boyfriend. Their relationship was a ticking time bomb. What drove them to plan such a brutal robbery? The answer remained unclear. By the end of March 4th, Frank and Lacaze were in custody. During interrogation, Frank confessed. She admitted to shooting Ha and Kwong, but blamed Lacaze for William's death. Hours later, she changed her story, claiming she had been forced. Lacaze, on the other hand, said nothing, leaving Frank to take the fall. Some witnesses suggested Lacaze had manipulated her, but Frank's initial confession told a different story, a woman who acted with intent. The truth seemed buried under layers of lies. In September 1995, Antoinette Frank's trial began. The case gripped New Orleans. A police officer accused of killing a fellow cop and 2 civilians, it was unprecedented. Prosecutors brought Chauveau to the stand. She described in heartbreaking detail how Frank executed her siblings. The stolen key and the transaction with Williams' card bolstered the case. Frank's defense tried to shift the blame onto Lacaze, claiming she hadn't acted alone, but the evidence was overwhelming. After just 22 minutes of deliberation, the jury found her guilty on 3 counts of first-degree murder. Lacaze, tried separately, was also found guilty. On October 20th, 1995, Antoinette Frank was sentenced to death by lethal injection. She became the only woman on Louisiana's death row. Lacaze was also sentenced to death, but in 2019, his sentence was commuted to life without parole, a decision that still leaves many in the community uneasy. Why the difference? Frank has spent nearly 30 years appealing her case until her legal team changed strategy. They revealed a childhood scarred by physical and emotional abuse. They also presented evidence that Lacaze threatened her with a gun during the robbery. In 2023, Frank requested clemency. The board voted 2-2, and the request was denied.
Louisiana Pardon Board refuses a new clemency hearing for death row inmate Antoinette Frank.
Now 53 years old, she remains at the Louisiana Correctional Institute for Women, exhausting her final appeals. Behind her badge, Antoinette Frank hid a dark past, a childhood of abuse, a toxic relationship with a criminal. But none of that explains the cold-blooded execution of 3 people, including a fellow officer who trusted her. What made her cross that line? Is there still more to this story that has yet to come to light? Case number 2. On October 14th, 1994, a gunshot echoed through the lower 9th Ward of New Orleans. Kim Groves, 32 years old and mother of 3, collapsed dead just a block from her home. It wasn't a robbery, it wasn't an accident, it was a planned murder. Len Davis, a 30-year-old officer with the New Orleans Police Department, was not at the scene. But his voice, captured on secret recordings, would reveal a chilling truth. The truth was that the woman had made a fatal mistake. She had reported Davis for brutality. The day before, October 13th, Groves had witnessed Davis brutally beat a teenager on the street. Outraged, she filed a complaint with the police's internal affairs. Hours later, a colleague alerted Davis about the complaint. Furious, Davis couldn't allow himself to be exposed in that way. The officer called Paul Hardy, a 28-year-old drug dealer known as Cool. He gave Hardy a description of Groves, her address, and a clear order. Kill her, you need to finish Kim Groves. That night, Hardy, accompanied by Damon Causey, a friend and accomplice in his drug dealings, drove to Groves' neighborhood. Hardy got out of the car, approached her, and shot her in the head with a 9mm handgun. Groves died instantly. Hardy tossed the gun barrel into a canal while Causey hid the rest of the gun at his house. Davis, from a distance, celebrated. Rockabye, he said on the phone, laughing like a killer in a movie. What Davis didn't know was that the FBI already had him in their sights. His recordings would betray him, and punishment was coming. The investigation began hours after the murder when police found Groves's body. Detective Michael Burris led the case. At first, it seemed like just another homicide in a city plagued by violence. But one detail changed everything. The brutality complaint Groves had filed that same day. Burris contacted Internal Affairs and discovered that Groves had named Len Davis as the aggressor of the teenager. This raised suspicions. Meanwhile, the FBI, who had been investigating Davis for corruption, shared crucial information. For months, they had been tapping his phone, suspecting he was protecting drug dealers. The recordings were devastating. In a call on October 13th, Davis gave Hardy the details about Groves, her appearance, her address. "Take care of her," he ordered. Later, at 10:50 p.m., Davis called his former partner, Sammy Williams, and said, "Signal 30 Nat." It was a police code in English meaning homicide, action taken. Williams understood. Groves was dead. The next day, Davis confirmed the murder with Hardy, laughing. Yes, rockabye. Investigators tracked down Hardy. A witness, Stephen Jackson, confirmed that Hardy admitted to killing a woman at Lenny's order. Jackson saw Hardy throw the gun barrel into a canal. The police recovered the barrel, but it was too corroded for ballistics tests. However, they found a Beretta pistol in Causey's house, compatible with the weapon used in the crime. With the FBI's recordings, Jackson's testimony, and Groves' complaint, investigators had a solid case. Davis, Hardy, and Causey were identified as the culprits. Len Davis was no stranger to the New Orleans Police Department. Born in 1964, he joined the force in 1987. In 6 years, he accumulated 20 complaints of brutality and intimidation. Residents nicknamed him RoboCop due to his imposing physique and authoritative attitude. In the Desire Housing Project, a public housing complex for low-income families, known for its poverty and high crime rate, he was called the Terrorist of Desire. There, he patrolled, and the neighbors feared him for his beatings and threats. Davis had been suspended 6 times, once for beating a woman with his flashlight, but the complaints never went anywhere. Witnesses retracted their statements, intimidated. Since 1994, the FBI had been investigating him for running a protection racket for cocaine traffickers. He extorted drug dealers in exchange for covering up their crimes. Hardy, his hitman, was one of his allies. How did a police officer get so far? No one stopped him until he killed Kim Groves. On November 14, 1994, a month after the murder, the FBI arrested Len Davis, Paul Hardy, and Damon Causey. The phone recordings were irrefutable. Davis was charged with violating Groves' civil rights by ordering her murder and witness tampering. Hardy and Causey faced similar charges. They all faced the death penalty. Sammy Williams, Davis's former partner, struck a deal. In exchange for immunity, he testified against Davis, confirming the recordings and the murder plot. New Orleans was in shock. Another corrupt cop had betrayed the city. The trial of Len Davis began on April 8, 1996. The prosecutors presented a relentless case. The FBI recordings were the key evidence. The jury listened to Davis ordering the murder, laughing and celebrating it. Sammy Williams' testimony strengthened the case. He described how Davis planned the crime after learning of Groves' complaint. Davis's defense, led by Dwight Dosky, argued that the recordings did not prove he intended to kill Groves, only that he talked to Hardy. But the evidence was overwhelming. On April 24, 1996, after 2 weeks of trial, the jury found Davis guilty on 2 federal charges, violating Groves' civil rights through murder and witness tampering. Hardy and Causey were also convicted. The jury recommended the death penalty for Davis and Hardy. Causey, for hiding the weapon, faced another sentence. On April 26, 1996, Len Davis was sentenced to death by lethal injection. Paul Hardy, the drug dealer, also received the death penalty, while Damon Causey was sentenced to life in prison after rejecting a plea deal that offered him 6 to 9 years. The case exposed corruption within the New Orleans Police Department, but it didn't end there. In 1999, the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals overturned Davis' conviction for witness tampering, revoking his death sentence. However, in a retrial in 2005, another jury again chose the death penalty. Davis was sentenced to death again on October 27, 2005. Hardy, whose conviction for witness tampering was also overturned, had his death sentence commuted to life in prison in 2011 due to intellectual disability. Davis appealed for years, claiming withheld evidence and biased juries. In 2020, a court rejected his request for a new trial. But on December 23, 2024, President Joe Biden commuted his sentence to life in prison without parole, along with 37 other federal prisoners. Davis, now 60 years old, remains in the Terre Haute Penitentiary in Indiana. Len Davis was a predator with a badge. He protected drug dealers, beat civilians, and silenced witnesses. But Kim Groves, a mother who simply sought justice, paid the ultimate price for confronting him. The FBI recordings revealed his true face, a man who used his power to kill without remorse. How did he get so far without anyone stopping him? How many more victims did he leave in his wake? His case is a warning of what happens when corruption hides behind a badge. Number 3, November 9, 1994. Farah Fratta, 33 years old, mother of 3 children, got out of her car in the garage of her house in Atascocita, Texas. 2 gunshots echoed in the night. She fell dead, with 2 bullets in her head. It wasn't a robbery, it wasn't a crime of passion, it was a planned murder. Robert Fratta, 37 years old, was at a nearby church with his children when the crime occurred. It seemed like the perfect alibi, but the truth was darker. Farah and Robert were in a bitter divorce, fighting for custody of their children. For Robert, the solution wasn't an agreement, it was a death contract. Months earlier, Robert began looking for a hitman. He spoke to friends and acquaintances, asking if they knew anyone who could take care of Farah. "I'll kill her, do my time, and when I get out, I'll have my kids," he told a friend. He eventually found Joseph Pristash, a 38-year-old neighbor and former scam artist. Pristash agreed to be the middleman in exchange for Robert's Jeep. Then he recruited Howard Guidry, an 18-year-old who lived nearby, promising him $1,000 for the shooting. That night, while Robert was taking his children to classes at the church, Pristash drove Guidry to Farah's house. Guidry, dressed in black, waited hidden behind a tree. When the woman arrived, he ambushed her and shot her twice in the head at point-blank range. Pristash, the neighbor, picked up the young man in a silver car with a burnt-out headlight, and they fled. Robert, from the church, made several calls to confirm that the job was done. Farah's blood was still fresh in the garage, and Robert's alibi was beginning to fall apart. The investigation began that very night, when a neighbor, Laura Holscher, called 911. She reported seeing a black man dressed in black leaving the garage and getting into a silver car with a burnt-out headlight. "She's on the ground," she said, pleading for an ambulance. The police arrived and found Farah dead, with 2 bullet wounds to her head. Detective William Valerio, from the Harris County Sheriff's Department, noticed that the crime seemed like a planned murder, not a robbery. Nothing had been stolen. Investigators suspected Robert Fratta from the start. His divorce from Farah was public and contentious. She had accused him of trying to attack her before, and he didn't hide his hatred. Valerio interviewed Robert hours after the murder. He was calm, cooperative, as if he were investigating the case himself, said Valerio. His cold attitude was unusual for a grieving husband. "Extremely unusual," added the detective. Months later, the case took a turn in March 1995, when Guidry, the young man recruited to shoot, was arrested for an unrelated bank robbery. The gun used in the robbery was the same one that killed Farah, a .38 caliber. Under interrogation, Guidry confessed. He said that Pristash had hired him to shoot, and that Robert Fratta was behind everything. When confronted, Pristash also confessed. His girlfriend, Mary Gipp, received immunity in exchange for her testimony. She revealed that Pristash had told her about the plan. Robert offered his Jeep and $1,000 for the murder. Gipp admitted knowing about the crime, but didn't report it. "I didn't want to get involved," she said. The confessions, Gipp's testimony, and the weapon evidence linked the 3 men. Robert Fratta, the officer who used his badge to conceal his evil, was about to face justice. Robert Fratta, born in 1957, was charismatic, but his personal life was a mess. Married to Farah since 1983, they had 3 children, Bradley, Daniel, and Amber. But their marriage collapsed due to irreconcilable differences. Farah filed for divorce in 1994 and moved to Humble, Texas. The battle for custody of their children became fierce. Fratta didn't accept losing. Court records showed that he was misogynistic and controlling. He openly spoke about wanting Farah dead. "If I can't have my kids, no one will," he told a colleague. For months, he searched for a hitman, offering money and favors. His position as an officer gave him confidence. He believed no one would suspect a cop at the church with his children, but his arrogance betrayed him. Every call he made, every conversation he had, left a trail that investigators would follow. On March 1, 1995, Robert Fratta was arrested along with Joseph Pristash and Howard Guidry for the murder of Farah Fratta, his wife. Guidry and Pristash's confessions, along with Mary Gipp's testimony and phone records, pointed to Fratta as the mastermind. He was fired from the police force and lost custody of his children. In 1996, Fratta was found guilty and sentenced to death. However, in 2007, a judge overturned the conviction due to a violation of the right to confront witnesses. In a second trial in 2009, his own children testified against him. He was convicted of murder once again and sentenced to death. Pristash and Guidry were also sentenced to death, but Guidry later received life in prison, and Pristash had his sentence commuted in 2017. Fratta appealed for years without success. In 2023, the Supreme Court rejected his last attempt, and a Texas court reversed an order seeking to halt his execution due to the use of expired lethal drugs. Nothing worked. On January 10, 2023, Robert Fratta, 65 years old, received a lethal injection at the Huntsville Penitentiary in Texas.
Last night, the state of Texas executed Robert Fratta for hiring hitmen to murder his wife Farah in 1994.
He was declared dead at 7:49 p.m. He offered no final words, ignoring his son Bradley and Farah's brother Zane, who witnessed the execution. He was a coward in 1994, and he was a coward until the end.
He was a coward in 1994, and 28 years plus later, he still was a coward,
said Andy Kahan from Crime Stoppers of Houston. Robert Fratta used his badge and his faith as a shield for a vile crime. He believed that his alibi at the church would save him, but he left behind a trail of blood and betrayal. Farah Fratta only wanted to protect her children. She paid with her life for confronting a dangerous man who wanted to keep her children. This case reminds us of a bitter truth. Sometimes the danger is not on the streets, but in those who wear the uniform. How many more like Fratta are still hiding among us? If you liked the video, you can visit the channel and watch more of our content. This is Final Sentence. Don't accept imitations.